Are there any questions or Carola has a question for Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. How are you? I loved your paper, and I really love the concept of pedagogies of belonging. Did you write about this in your book? And if not, where can I find a citation?
Thanks so much, Carola. I do write about this some in my book, and I have a couple of short papers that I'm happy to send and share with you or deliver in person. But I also think that I'm hoping in many ways that some of what we've heard today and ways in which we're seeing schools and teachers create these kinds of pedagogies in many different places that resonate across the world is something that can be a kind of collective mobilization to document these kind of pedagogies and share across countries, across schools. This is one of the things that I for sure notice in my work over time is that teachers are so hungry to really hear and learn about the kinds of practices that other teachers have created, particularly in moments of disruption and crisis when so much happens at the very local level. So I look forward to discussing it more with you, Carola, and with anyone else who's interested.
Thank you. And I think it's very relevant to refugee children. It's also relevant to immigrant children. It's relevant to children in crisis of all kinds, relevant to marginalized children. It's a concept that is pithy and beautifully, in a little phrase, catching something very important. So thank you for that contribution.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Sarah?
Marcelo, I think I see Sebastian with a hand up in Zoom, which may or may not be visible on your screen.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hola, Sebastián, ¿cómo estás?
Hola,
Please.
Marcelo.
Please.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Thank you, Sebastian.
I have a question for Stefania. I'm sorry, Sarah. Stefania, bringing Professor Reimer's insights on inclusive leadership, what conservative mindset tendencies or you can identify as potential targets to consider in the challenging future steps you described in your.
Thank you.
Still, I think it's about the role of teachers for sure. Inclusive leadership should be one of the main approach that teachers have to put in practice in the classroom. This report I was mentioning on the futures of education focused very much on the teaching profession really being rethought around the building, team building and cooperation assets, and then the individual improvement of career and training. And the second dimension I see is about the leadership of principals in the schools. I think that this is another important component of a new model of schooling, because if you want really to change to reshape learning environments according to these new needs, it's very much part of organizing a new kind of space and time for schooling and taking the responsibility to innovate and to unlock the potential of innovation. So we saw many, many, many good examples of that at local level. The problem, the challenge is always the same, how we can scale up. And this is something that maybe can be part of the collective force we are doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stefania. Gabriela, when the Cardinal arrives, can you let me know, please? Thank you. Jeff, you had a question.
I wanted to talk about scaling up just for a moment. I think the way to scale up is to have a plan to scale up and to have a budget to scale up. And I think that UNESCO and UNICEF together could make a powerful plan, and it would require the Secretary General leading it, and to say this is a goal given what's happened with COVID. And the points you raised are exactly right. Every school should have this, and this. And that is a very operational thing. And since you're already doing mapping of schools also and their capacities, the ability to truly operationalize this is there. I had experiences with this a few times. First with the Global Fund, establishing the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. Then with mass distribution of bed nets against malaria and so forth. And it starts out as an idea, but it needs to be turned into something quite specific. And once it's specific, it's a little bit hard to turn down. So if it's specific enough that says, not just a vague goal, but we have identified 18,000 schools across the following countries, and they need this, and per school, this is what is required. And this can be done on the basis of, and then one needs to operationalize it a little bit more deeply, but the Minister of Education definitely support, local NGO delivery mechanism, competitive bid, something like the Global Fund did. And this plan will require $4 billion, say. That's achievable funding. What's not achievable is we'd really like you to help with education to whoever it is. And I would like to help you with that. It's very specific. If that's what you'd like to do, I think we really should do it. And I've watched several times close up. You know, with the bed nets, I argued 7 years, just distribute bed nets, because everyone was trying to sell bed nets and everyone was trying to socially market them, and it was ridiculous. And we did one test case, and then we did a country, Kenya, and then Ban Ki-moon, when he first came into office, I suggested to him, how about making this a centerpiece? Well, WHO's not so sure, the donors aren't so sure, nobody quite likes this. Is it sustainable? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then he said, but I think it's a good idea. And he announced it, and the Global Fund said, oh, of course, we'll support that. And then within 3 years, it was about $1 billion nets distributed. So it requires specificity, but it's really worth doing. And the points that you raised, I think, make it fun to do in the following sense. Right now, we really literally have a way to electrify anything. It's just solar panels on the roof with a battery. It's low cost, but you can definitely link it to a school. So the idea is there's connectivity in school and a local Wi-Fi in the school. Then locally, the telecoms and maybe one of the big tech companies will put in the rest of the infrastructure so that it's on a base station locally around the schools as well. It's very operational now. Health has done that many times, but education has not. So immunization campaigns, deworming campaigns, bednet campaigns, HIV drug campaigns, this is how they all work. Education's never done that, because before you wouldn't say, well, we're going to build schools but here it's something different. It's very specific. Anyway, I won't go on except to say it's absolutely practical. And I hope you don't just put it out as a good idea and as something that at this summit we can endorse, but actually say we're going to do it, and this is what we need to do it. And that's a good assigned the Secretary General to go get that, and I know where he can go get that.
We're having technical difficulties with the bishop in Boston. So maybe Stefania, you want to reflect on Jeff's commentary. Then I have a question for you and for Sarah.
Shall I go first, or you want? Okay. Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, expected outcomes of this summit, as I try to briefly summarize, are exactly, Jeff, what you said: concrete, time-bound, measurable targets within these key priority areas that we actually already identified. I mean, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's really building on the lessons we learn and also the challenges that we are still facing. Teachers and teaching profession, digital learning from different perspectives, we already many times mentioned today. Inclusive, healthy schools, which means a lot of what you are suggesting. So, why health as a public sector succeed and education is struggling? Well, listen, that's at least my understanding. When you are addressing a pandemic, you have a clear mission to achieve. You need vaccines. And then the entire community of researchers, institutions, health institutions, governments, private sector, big farms as well in this case, put all their energies on something that everybody can understand what is about, and you can also measure in terms of the budget you need, and you can see clearly which is the benefit you can have. Then there is the question of the discussion, how the science, scientists could be better understood and also trusted by common people. This is another part of the challenge. But in terms of vaccination to be prioritized and the whole health sector focusing on that, something that you can easily understand and being accountable for. When you move to education, that's why I insisted very much on the game changer as this crisis has been and still is. Before the pandemic, it was so difficult, Jeff, to select within the list of the 10 targets of SDG 4, which is about everything. So it's about teachers, it's about early childhood, it's about higher education, it's about education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So it's a long menu and list of priorities. So it's very much difficult to say, where do we start from? Where is the real need and the urgency we have now? This crisis actually, I can say, oblige all of us to focus on what we need. And that's the result of a new kind of model of cooperation. And that's the new common agenda we have. It's not by chance that at UNICEF and UNESCO and the World Bank, different systems of power or of thinking and acting, now we speak the same language and we focus on the same priorities. So that's why I'm confident that we have the opportunity. Of course, it's about fine-tuning the model and to go in New York in September, not simply with these broad, clear priorities, but to say, well, listen, it's about teachers. How many well-trained teachers sub-Saharan region could need in the coming 5 years in order to fill the gaps that we have and to keep remedial actions to the learning losses in order to go beyond the crisis with a new system of teaching. And this is about numbers and budget. Sorry.
A quick question, Stefano. Why in the education area we do not still have the habit of applying impact evaluation? Today, we have impact investment, impact finance everywhere. Now, I know that is difficult, but why UNESCO doesn't propose its model of impact evaluation in the education? Of course, then different countries might modify, etc. But unless somebody take the initiatives, because look what happened with the national accounting. National account is the system whereby we measure GDP. Now, you know, it was established in the 20s of last century, 1 century ago. And it came out of the initiative of 3 people, in this case, 3 economists. It was at the time when everybody was saying, oh, it's impossible to measure national income, blah, 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 etc. They started. At the end, everybody got it. And today, of course, today we know that we need to go much beyond. But for a long time, everybody, why don't you do the same? I know that there are difficulties. There is a long list. But because of that, just UNESCO is UNESCO, is United Nations. You have the authority to propose, not to impose, to various countries. And in my opinion, because impact evaluation today is a common, nobody is against it. Because output evaluation is not enough, outcome evaluation is not enough. We have to move towards impact evaluation. I'm sure that if you do it as UNESCO, you will succeed. Any news? Any good news?
We are in we're in Zoom purgatory here, and we are waiting for a signal from the city of Boston. But perhaps if Melissa just Stefania, if the Reverend Barber is ready. He's not ready yet. So, Melissa.
If he comes, let me know and I'll stop talking. I have a simple, extremely concrete thought about impact evaluations. Having struggled with that in some of our research projects, I can tell you what one of the biggest problem is. Funders don't want to fund what it costs to do a really high quality impact evaluation in a complex situation. Let's educate funders about the long range benefits of a model program like Stefania is talking about with an incredibly well designed impact evaluation. I agree it's so important, but I cannot tell you how many people said, oh, the whole study is going to cost blah, 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 price tag. We can't double it by, you know. I think it's the donors, yes. What? I'm not sure what you said, but I think it was funny. Yeah, oh, good, good.
Gunilla, please.
Very quick one on the impact evaluations. I know that UNESCO do impact evaluations. We do, UNICEF does impact evaluations, both in the area of education, but also, and even more so actually, in social policy. And yes, they are costly. They're very costly. And I think it is an opportunity for us to actually educate the donors who are funding the development programs by saying we're only actually going to do this if we also make sure that when we do this and implement this program, we also do an impact evaluation. I believe very much in impact evaluations. And on the issue of the Transformation Education Summit, I don't dare to say anything. I will agree, we speak with one voice here, the UN. UNESCO and UNICEF very much, and my colleagues Jeff, my colleagues in New York, who know the education sector much better than I do, who work very closely with Stefania, and my chief of education research in Florence, who also works very closely together with the teams. They're all aligned. So yes, this is the time to do something real and actually get action. Transformation Summit is going to be transforming things, I hope. Thanks.
I have a question, perhaps for both Stefania and for Sarah in Zoom. And a claim that has been articulated is that in education, like in so many other domains, innovation lives in the practice. And that teachers all over the world live in silo. And they have to often invent and reinvent the wheel. If you're a neurotypical child, there are ways to teach that are very well established. And it seems that the migration of knowledge and practice from one silo to another is very, very complicated in the work of teachers. One of the issues you've articulated, I think, with a great deal of clarity and hope and optimism in your voice, is the notion that, and Fernando also echoed this theme, that the pandemic in fundamental ways disrupted these silos and these codified and customary practices that live in separate domains. So I'm intrigued if you can say a little bit more about the problem of innovation in teaching that lives in the practice of teaching. There's an enormous corpus of literature that in the health sciences that flow from medicine on improvement science. And I wonder how much are you thinking about ways in which networked improvement can be better articulated. It seems that at the leadership level, Fernando talked about the secretary in Sao Paulo, the secretary in Bogota, just bypassing just the traditional structures and going at issues with each other. I wonder how much of that you see.
I think that the main difference between teaching in school systems than teaching at university level is very much about this dimension, which is very much local, based for teachers, as well as university professors, researchers are by definition internationally connected and belong to this international community. So what the pandemic actually changed in school system is about this international share information and practices exercise that has been established since the beginning of the pandemic, thanks to technology. I mean, that's what I said before. We have to recognize that when we talk about learning continuity and sharing online platforms, UNESCO has been one of the platforms which, since the beginning of the crisis, actually convene all these webinars from the ministerial level to communities and different constituencies, including teachers, in order to make them able to day by day see the evolution of the crisis and what is working, what it doesn't work actually, and how can I take lessons from maybe the other part of the world that I couldn't reach or I didn't think, because Zoom is not something that we discovered in the last 2 years, but we discovered that it's a tool that we can use and we can really take advantage from. That's the difference. So I see a new need and demand for international connection and networking between teachers, constituencies. And I think that this is one of the main important assets we have. The role of international organizations is an important one in the coming months and years, because it's about keeping the momentum and not going back to the business as usual, or at least encouraging also governments to support teachers in that. The second point, I think it's about what already Fernando mentioned, explained very well. This crisis has been a kind of laboratory for innovation in many sectors, including education. The question, and innovators by definition have been teachers and learners, educators who actually were in the classroom to reinvent the system overnight almost. So the problem now is how we can make this storage of knowledge and good practices available to all those who want to take this to build on that. And this is a little bit more complicated because it's about also, that's why I think teaching profession should be rethought. Teachers are not incentivized in terms of career development, for sure not in Europe, but I don't think in the US as well, where there is a career development to invest their time on that side. So this is maybe something which can be brought out at the level of political leadership and see how teaching profession should be rethought.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Shall I go ahead, Marcelo, or has the...
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Sorry, it's hard to read the room. But thanks for all these great questions. And it's great to hear everyone's thoughts. I guess just two things I wanted to mention in response to this collection of questions. And Stephanie, I think the first point that I wanted to make really stems out of what you were just saying too, of kind of where is the space in which some of this innovation is happening, and how do we think about ways in which resources and power reach those spaces? And I think one of the things that has been clear over the pandemic is that it is within classrooms and schools that that innovation and shifting practices can happen more quickly. And in many ways, we saw teachers and individual schools able to much more easily and readily respond to conditions than we did see systems. And I think this is something we see in conflict settings all the time, is that we kind of from a distance, we wait for global actors and big solutions to come in and act, while in the meantime, families and communities are setting up schools and creating opportunities for kids to learn. And I guess I hope that we can think about the ways in which these resources and power move in multiple directions. And so we're thinking about, just as many have said, kind of what are the practices that teachers are using that are particularly effective. And how do we know they're effective? How do we learn through all different kinds of research, not just impact evaluations that also struggle with their external validity, but multiple methods of trying to figure out great opportunities for different kinds of programs and how they might be adapted in different contexts to really meet different needs, and share those among these kinds of networks. And I think this really speaks to the kind of middle level leadership, Stefania, that you were talking about before as well. And maybe in response to some of your questions is, in addition, Jeff, of thinking about the kind of role that regional leaders within countries play in being able to work with teachers, facilitate these kind of professional learning communities, it sounds like, that we're talking about, where practices can be shared in real time. Because I think one of the things that is quite different in education is that these micro level decisions that teachers are making all the time are so integrally a part of the kind of learning that goes on. And those can't be planned in a kind of programmatic way from start to finish. And the second element of that is just the long-term nature. So we're looking at outcomes, but by necessity, we're looking at outcomes that are of very different length. So we may be looking at a program that lasts for 3 months, and what can we know about those outcomes? Great. But we also need to be doing the kind of longitudinal look that can really evaluate the kind of outcomes that we're interested in education, which don't only span any particular program or any particular year of school, but which really are a whole generation in many ways, and a whole education for any individual student and for a community. So I'm excited to think about the ways in which these different levels of power and level of decision-making actually work together to support teachers and students within classrooms.